and never again is
All
now.
right.
And that's what people need to understand. Loosely translated or loosely paraphrased, Abraham Lincoln once said that evil persists when good people or people of goodwill do nothing. And that's what they're counting on.
That's right.
The special relationship with Israel, not because they're a Jewish state, not because they're our ally, but all the positive contributions in the world. So this is not just a, hey, let's all get together and have 500 people in the seat. This is going to reach millions of people streaming on all the channels across the country. That's the important piece of this, because no one is pushing back on the narrative, and no one is putting out the real information about why Israel, the small nation, is so important, not only in the Middle East, but to the world. Because, to give you a little hint, we're going to look at the world, what it might look like if Israel didn't exist, because that's what River to the Sea means. Ooh. Stay tuned for Israel Appreciation Day. It's going to be a very special event. I hope you'll join us. Certainly tune in on one of your streaming channels, Roku, Apple TV, Dish Network, some others as well. So be there or be square. Excellent. So I'm debating, right? Because you and I are sort of going so long today that we have a few more WTOs, but then there's this whole DC Watch thing because there's so much stuff going on. I'm going to let you choose. Where are we going next? What do you want to go to? Come on, make a decision.
Oh, the W. Well, we don't want to bury the lead. So let's
the DC Watch. The former. So did you hear what happened at Quantico? And by the way, do you know where Quantico is? You know what Quantico is, right? No, it's the U.S. Marines. It's the U.S. Marines
training
headquarters. The FBI and the DEA do some training there. So the other day, they apprehended 2 Jordanian nationals.
Okay.
Right, you probably missed this in the news. They apprehend 2 Jordanian nationals who had a box truck that tried to get into the base. Right. Allegedly, they were from Amazon. They obviously put up the barriers and whatever. And it turns out that one of them crossed the border illegally in San Diego. Another one is a student who overstayed their visa. And everyone who's in the know that I'm talking to says, much like 9/11, they did this dry run about getting on planes and box cutters and getting them through security, is they were testing the security at Quantico for a future attack. Now, maybe will do it and maybe they won't. But give me another explanation as to why 2 Jordanian nationals who just happened to take a wrong turn and end up in Quantico, which, by the way, if you've been there, which I have, you can't really take a wrong turn.
You can't take a wrong turn. And they're Amazon delivery drivers.
No, Amazon denies
illegal immigrants.
Amazon denies it. So Amazon said it was looking into it. Yeah.
No, I'm clear about that. They couldn't get a job at Amazon as illegal immigrants. I sit there and go,
okay. It's just, and again,
wow.
Look, I don't want to be incendiary. I don't want to be, flame or fan the flames of conspiracy theories. Lord knows I do that enough on other things. But someone needs to explain to me why that isn't in the news more. Because we generally look for buried articles, because the other stuff you're going to see on the news at 6, or you're going to go to Fox, or you're going to go to CNN, but. Well, no, but you're going to see the big stories that are up here, right?
Over and over.
But it's the little stories that maybe they're on the news for like 3 minutes somewhere, like the Trump trial. You want to know what's going on in the Trump trial? Turn on CNN, because it's 24/7, right?
Yeah, but we're not going to talk about the fact that 2 illegal immigrants just.
There's 2 things on the news that you're never going to see these days. Number one is little stories like this, and number 2, the fact that there are still hostages being held in Gaza. And we are, let's see, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. We're 7 months into this, so that gets us 200 and some odd days. Why don't you hear about the hostages? Why don't you see their pictures?
Because here's the thing. All of these things indicate a failure of the current administration and of Democrats.
No.
They have had
Trump's fault.
No?
It's Trump's fault.
Well, that's how they're trying to spin it. Whenever any of the actual problems going on in the country happen to leak out into the public, they try to blame Trump for it. And it's like,
it's Trump's fault.
I'm sorry. Yo, you can say a lot about Trump. There is a treasure trove of criticism for Donald Trump, but the border crisis is definitely not one of them.
Under the heading of, if you break it, you own it. Right. If it happens during your watch, you're on it.
Yeah.
Right. You can try to blame a prior administration. That's sort of a old thing that most, administrations do. They want to deflect. But there are two major world cataclysms that are going on right now that started during the Biden administration. The Hamas war, or Israel's, war, against Hamas, is one. And the Russia-Ukraine war, or Ukraine-Russia war, I don't know what the proper name is. Both happen under Biden's watch, on top of which he gives Iran $100 billion and removes sanctions. So,
and that's that's just the surface, Robert. We're not even talking about all the coups that are happening in Africa, Lebanon, Syria, like all the crazy madness that's happening, China aggressing on Taiwan. I mean, basically, okay.
You're gonna go out on a limb?
I'm gonna.
You're gonna go out on a limb?
I was.
Wait, you were wrong?
It's possible.
You were wrong. Wait.
I want to hear the possible.
Words. Come on.
It's possible that I was.
Right. I know you have a hard time. So does that mean I was right, or is this like your husband was right?
Possible that I was wrong.
I was right and you were wrong.
It's possible that you might be more right than me in some ways. I know, I'm admitting it. I definitely tend toward being an isolationist. I mean, that's the reality. Like, I don't want to spend money on wars. I don't want to be the world police. I don't want to try to tell people how to run their country. Like, I don't think that's our responsibility. But I do also recognize at the same time that when there is not a strong, united States, a strong United States, that the tyrants of the world go crazy, and they're just like, we're just gonna.
You bring up an interesting point, right? I mean, and I'm old enough to have lived through the Cold War, and to see the fall of the Berlin Wall, and to see the fall of the Soviet Union. But at that time, the world was divided into two superpowers, allegedly, right? The USSR, Soviet Union, and the United States, and that balance of power created sort of a stability at the high level. It did allow for sort of some theater activity in terms of through proxies and other things. You have the fall of the Soviet Union, right? I think in the 80s, the year actually escapes me these days. There's too much crap in my head. But and for a short, brief time, they call it a peace dividend, right? For a short time, the United States was the acknowledged single superpower in the world. That has now changed, and we can discuss whether it was done intentionally or not. I would argue was done intentionally, internally, and you would probably agree. But no one can argue the fact that the United States has lost its perch as the sole superpower. China's ascension and sort of competition for hegemony, their Belt and Road initiative in the Southern Hemisphere. They're throwing money around, basically. Certainly the new, what I would call axis of evil, which would be China, Iran, and Russia, certainly are a counterbalance to the U.S., even if they were, still the single superpower, which I would argue they're not. So yeah, in that instance, I think you get a scenario where the world is less stable, and therefore you're going to see, number one, more theaters where there is going to be conflict. And number two, you're going to see the reemergence, and I've argued this for, I don't know, the last year we've been on, of realpolitik, which is sort of a German principle, capital R, small k, basically says an enemy of my enemy is my friend, which is there will be regional alliances that will shift depending on what the issue is. So Israel, out of necessity, is going to have to move out of this sole reliance on the United States and look for other allies, especially when they're getting their weapons cut off, from them. And other countries the same thing. You're going to see multipolar. We're already in a multipolar world where the U.S. and China are clearly the two strongest countries, but there's still only so much we can do in a multipolar world. And everyone, the 20th century, Dr. Bruce Abramson likes to say that the 20th century was really the American century, and I would agree with that. But the 21st century is yet to be stamped, and it's looking more like it may be China's century. We'll see.
Well, and I think that it's so important right now for us to just be diligent, be paying attention, be aware, and don't take for granted that, that the United States still does have the opportunity to retake the moral high ground here. But it is hard after, you like the whole thing about the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And then, so we do all this stuff with Saudi Arabia, right? As an example, we need them for oil or this or that or the third. And then they kill people in the press, and we're like, oh man, how do we,
well, but their values are,
but then at the same time,
their values aren't our values.
Was president. Well, and that's the thing. And so like, there's all that weird stuff. But then at the same time, when Trump was president, we got the Abraham Accords.
Which, by the way, the Biden administration, let's be clear.
We don't have
the Abraham Accords was an inversion of what has been acknowledged or accepted U.S. policy since certainly Camp David Accords or the Oslo Agreement, which was that you have to have a Palestinian state before you can have peace in the Middle East. And what Donald Trump was able to do after moving the embassy to Jerusalem was to say, I don't agree with that. We need to take a fresh look at that. I think we can establish peace with other Middle East allies in Israel as a precursor to solving the, let's call it the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I am being way generous with labeling it as such, right? Because, Israel, as we've talked about, it's not in Israel's charter that you're going to drive the Palestinians into the sea or exterminate the people or using children as terror, as suicide bombers or shields. So let's not even get into that.
Shields.
But you're right. You had the Abraham Accords, but the Biden administration has now reversed that again, and they came out, Secretary of State, Tony Blinken basically said that a Palestinian state is a precursor or a prerequisite to peace in the Middle East. And what happens immediately thereafter, because he gave cover to it? Ireland, Spain, and I want to say Norway, I think, was the third country that came out and recognized the Palestinian state, which, by the way, I have a question for you. If there's now a Palestinian state, Ericka, right? Come on, wait, stay with me. If there's now a Palestinian state, does that mean that the right of return no longer exists because they already have a state? Does that mean there's no refugee issue?
What?
They have a state. And by the way, you also know that, so the right of return and from the river to the sea are the same concept. People don't understand it. They think, right of return is they get to return to their land pre-1948. That is all of Israel. So when people say right of return, like the Palestinians should have a right of return.
But it wasn't theirs to
You're arguing logic against a religion.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Excuse me. Are you like pounding on something? As long as it's not me or your husband.
I absolutely pounded on my desk.
And by the way, there was a hearing. I want to segue. So there was a hearing in the Senate hearing where Senator Ted Cruz, God bless him, right? What a keen analytical mind, and just no bullshit, right? He just puts it out there. They are their witness, or the person. It's not a witness, just testifying before the Senate committee was Secretary of State Anton Blinken. And here's what Ted Cruz had to say. He said, Mr. Secretary, you have presided over the worst foreign policy disaster of modern times. When Joe Biden became president, he inherited peace and prosperity in the world. We have simultaneously wars waging in the worst in Europe since World War II and the worst in the Middle East in 50 years. Both, I believe, because of this administration's consistent weakness, right? And let's not forget that after October 7th, what was the first communique leaked out of the White House or the State Department? Was urging Israel not to retaliate militarily, right? And Blinken gives some lame response, right? Let me see if I got this here. But
can you can you imagine, Robert? Can you imagine if after, I don't know, Pearl Harbor.
9/11. No, 9/11.
Or no, let's do some. I was going to say, let's do something more recently. So 9/11 happens. Can you imagine if our allies had come out and said, turn the other cheek? You just got to turn the other cheek.
I was always taught that when you turn the other cheek, you sort of spin around and give them a backhand, but that's a martial arts thing. So, sorry. You can take the boy out of Jersey. You really can't take Jersey out of the boy. But in any event, look, people need to understand the relativity of it. 1,300 Israelis being murdered, raped, and brutally just assaulted on October 7th is the equivalent of about 29,000 or 30,000 Americans on 9/11, referenced or indexed to their population density, right?
Yeah.
So the question you really have to ask people is, if on September 11th, right, 9/11, 01, right? If September 11th, if 30,000 Americans were murdered, and not just 3, and I'm not 3,000 too many, but if it was 30,000, what's acceptable then? Because war is war. There are no rules in war, right? War is ugly for a reason. But if 30,000 Americans perished in September, the attacks of September 11th, you're going to tell the Bush administration that, well, we think that you shouldn't respond militarily.
Yeah. Well, and let me ask you this, Robert, and maybe I'm missing it. Okay, I'm going to be generous here. Maybe I'm missing it. Have you heard outcries and horror about innocent Russian civilians being killed by by that war? Have you heard about that? I haven't heard anything. Nobody seems to care about the Lebanese people getting killed by whatever's going on, or the Syrian people. They don't care about them. They don't care about the innocent Russians or Ukrainians that are being killed in that war. We don't care about any of those people. We somehow only care about Palestinians, supposedly.
Well,
I just, it's hard. Inconsistency makes me question.
You look for
I don't think you actually.
You look for political motives, or you look for monetary
care.
motives. Those are the only two things, right? I mean, what's the politics in it, or what's the motive? I mean,
That's
look,
right.
it's okay that Israel, and I don't want to. I mean, there's a whole other section we can get to. I don't want to, focus on it too much. I'm really talking about the Biden administration and the world they inherited versus, let's be honest, weakness breeds aggression. When you are perceived to be weak, then you have aggression, especially in a multipolar world, which is something we can get back to. But Israel is not allowed the right of self-defense, right? Or they're only allowed a proportionate response, and now they have so far exceeded their proportionate response that now they're genocidal, or they're committing war crimes. Was still right after October 7th when after the Biden administration said Israel should not respond militarily. Then they put out this nonsense about a proportional response, to which I said at the time, so let me see. So the Israelis should rape Palestinian women, cut off their genitalia, and burn babies while they're alive. Would that be the proportional response you're talking about? But again, you have to understand this is you can no more rationalize with Hamas because it's a religious fanaticism than you can with the mullahs of Iran, right? They do not.
That's right.
Adhere to Western rational thought. That doesn't mean that they're not rational. That doesn't mean that they aren't smart. It just means that their driving principles is a religious doctrine, and it's ideological, and it's not Western scientific, trust the science based. That's all. So. There's so much else I want to get into here, but I want to get back to, and I know we're jumping around, but I mean, I could just go on and on.
Well, hold on. We do need to take a quick break.
No, don't make that.
Before we go into the next segment.
Not that story. I know you should be.
So sorry. Do we want to hear from the defenders of American freedom today, or are we going to promo the event in July?
Of course, Israel Appreciation Day, coming to you live from DC.
All right, you guys.
On all the
Spread
streaming
the
channels.
word.